I'll jump back to your question. Sorry, this is how my brain works. I think you compared to whack-a-mole before. It's like, ooh, idea. It is random. Random ideas, words, maybe a certain phrase just kind of like lights a spark. There might be some odd observation, something that just kind of catches my attention.
All right, I will do my little thing. Greetings, Skullgateers. I'm Chris Vandyke, president of Skullgate Media and editor-in-chief of our flagship anthology series, Tales from the Near-Between. Welcome to Coffee at the Skullgate, an interview series where I sit down and talk to one of the writers whose work has appeared in our books. Today, I'm talking to Sarah Parker, who is one of the writers who helped create our first anthology, Achten Tan, Land of Dust and Bone, as well as Volume 2, Under New Suns. She has a number of pieces in both books, mostly poetry, but some fiction as well. So I'm super happy to sit down and talk today with Sarah Parker. Sarah, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me and having me.
Awesome. Good. So just to start with, who are you, either outside of writing, inside of writing, who is Sarah Parker? Give us the little elevator pitch for you.
Well, I'm a former teacher. I am a proud word nerd, a freelance editor. I've helped bring some memoirs and inspirational nonfiction books into publication. My interests include language, pop culture, travel, and neurology.
Cool. And definitely your interest in language clearly comes across in your writing, as you seem to really enjoy both playing with and just toying with language, syntax, grammar, the entire thing. So we'll get around to Achten Tan and Under New Suns and stuff you've done for Skullgate. But apart from that, what have you sort of done writing-wise, either before us, after us, between us? Just what have you?
I'm a hodgepodge writer, I guess. I have academic chapters in writing as a way of staying human in a time that isn't. And that contrasts soul, S-O-U-L, versus soul, S-O-L-E, expectations in writing. There's my wordplay. And then Xanax at middle age and pop culture. And in that, I got to use music as a vehicle to write about the revisionist 3 R's. And I present those as relevance, relationship, and revival. I also wrote a piece that plays with words as expressions, like express ions. And that was in the New Normal, a zombie anthology. And because brains, I got to write about neurodivergency, that kind of,
nice.
That's how my brain works. Brains, how do brains work, different brains. I also recently got some drabbles accepted in a Raven and Drake anthology. So that marks my entrance into the horror genre.
Cool. So we've got some science fiction, fantasy, zombie, horror, running the whole gamut there. What do you mean when you say you contrast the soul and the soul writing expectations? What are those two different words? I guess, what does that mean to you? What is the soul and the soul writing expectations?
Soul, S-O-L-E, is kind of like that standard. We all have, I was teaching freshman comp, and so I kind of based it off of that in this presentation. And this is the way you write, this is the format, but a lot of times our soul, the S-O-L-E, S-O-U-L, that is really who we are. That's the voice. It's the authenticity. It breaks with the mold. So I was writing about kind of how those two can meet in the classroom, because we have a separation of self and academic writing a lot of times. So that was the main, I guess, driving force behind it and where the wordplay came in.
Okay, so I have an academic writer to self as that requirement to sort of do things in a formal, sort of structured fashion, sort of that contrast to what writing means to you as a human being. So I'd like you to describe yourself as a hodgepodge writer, because I think we might be a hodgepodge publication and publisher. All of our books are definitely a bit of a hodgepodge. And I think of all the writers I've worked with the past year, your work is certainly the least traditional. Might be a toss-up between you and Elvira. But most of the people who respond to tend to be, consider themselves just more genre writers. They write fantasy, they write sci-fi. And speculative poetry isn't that common. Like you don't normally see sci-fi or fantasy poetry per se, especially not in the sort of more modern form. You tend to see people writing sonnets or mimicking Beowulf. Could you talk a little about your writing style and what led you to want to write poetry in a fantasy anthology?
Okay, I'm gonna, if it's cool, kind of flip it and start with the poems, because the poems in volume 1, they kind of serve for me as a transition and summation of the seasons. And it was also an opportunity to play with my different writer monikers. So I write under a few different ones. And for the why I do poetry the way I do, poetry's always been a mean of processing for me. And after a shift in I began focusing on how the word parts break down to build up additional meaning. So now I'm seeing kind of like word parts as roots. And I had been kind of uprooted from teaching after I had some brain stuff happen and some car accidents. So the word parts, I think my mind kind of maybe got stuck there, and it's now just how I do break things down. It's how I see the words. It's the layers of meaning.
Right. I see you do that a lot in the poetry. There's a lot of, just like you said, the process and the soul. So you do a lot of playing with both different pronunciations and taking a word and putting a punctuation into it and breaking it into those roots. And I guess like you said, that's sort of almost how you process language or have started thinking about it.
Sometimes I struggle with words. That's why I was a little bit nervous about this, because but I found, like, with poetry, there is that musicality to it too. And sometimes when you pause on the word, it like triggers a new piece of a word. And so that kind of interplay of the layers and how things come together and weave together, that's the core of my poetry play. And that's maybe the best I can express it right now. On a different day, I might totally be able to explain this in another fashion, but
Understood. No, I love that, because I mean, I think one of my probably the biggest moment for me in poetry is when I was studying T.S. Eliot for the first time in college, and I read, Prufrock. And I remember there's just the one line, the visions and revisions, and that sort of, there's something about the syllabication and the internal rhyme of that just like got stuck in my head for like an entire day. And while there's other things to talk about, many things, just that wordplay there is like just sort of, for some reason, blew my little like 19-year-old mind. That just taking very simple words and putting them side by side could just unleash all these sort of thoughts and emotions that were beyond the content, but were just sort of how the words sounded on the page. So I like that musicality that you play with. And I like the idea of using, like, so you put the poems between the summations of the season. So it's sort of, like you said, use poetry to process. It's sort of a way each, it's a change from one mode to the next.
I really love that you use the word revision too, because that's one of the first words that kind of triggered this way of looking at them. Because if you put that colon, then it's regarding the vision, and that's what revision is. Sometimes you have to look back at that word, like there is meaning in those words that we don't see, because and then that goes into connotation, denotation. Now my word nerd's really showing.
All right, so let's talk a little about so Achten Tan. You mentioned the poetry, and I know why I sent out my initial tweet. I was in COVID, I was bored, but I just was interested in asking everyone, what made you decide to join a book based on a random tweet by someone who was essentially a stranger at the time? I don't know if we followed each other or not, but I didn't really know anyone involved in this until the book happened. So just like what made you jump into it, and then what was the experience like?
The collaboration opportunity is really what appealed. And then yay world building, because I just started really delving into the fantasy. So I was really immersed with that. And I'm a fan of games. So I was excited to play a game and take the idea of game into writing. And I love that we were collectively building this word and then getting to fill it. And just the collaboration, we filled it individually and together. And that's one of the things I really loved about the process, is that we had our pieces, but then we also had, like, there's that DM thread where ideas were generated. And then there was also the opportunity to read other people's works. And I found that kind of really created that interweaving of the story.
It is really interesting how much the parts are greater than the whole, that having this group of writers come together who are willing to collaborate, the end product is like nothing I could have imagined, even if I'm titularly the person in charge. I'm really not in charge. The story ends up being in charge, and the world's in charge in a way that none of us are in control of, which I find awesome. I'm glad you do too as well. So I don't know, could you talk a little about what was, how did you approach like creating the world when it was your turn, and how did that lead to the story that you ended up telling, rather sort of the poems? Because you did have a narrative thread, but obviously yours was less narrative per se. But how did you approach, I guess, world building, and how did you approach when you came to process that world through your poetry?
Well, with volume one, I was really thinking about experience and expansion. And that dome orb kind of became a portal. So then that piece, Red Moon Sunday, that became the last in the book, for me was kind of that what next question. So there's that speculative element. And then I was also thinking about the mirror fragments and how communication can be fragmented. And then that whole discovery versus, academic kind of came to a crossroads with popular psychology. And then that experimental piece that I had about communication, I just started kind of not really riffing off the words, but kind of like communication, commune, nation, and just kind of rolled with all the different feedback, the different ways you could look at the words, what they mean, thinking about if we were to come across something that someone had written and we were to respond to it with the different context of this world. And that's kind of where I had Driscoll coming in and all of his little added bits in there about what the communication means, what communication really means. I guess that's kind of the wheels that were turning in this hamster mind as I started crafting them. Volume two, I think I was more in the process, and I wanted to weave the characters together through the shapeshifters because they're really like the element. And so then taking that fact that there was multiple shapeshifters and then there were several redheads, that kind of became the core of how I built that piece. And then, so that I kind of framed as like an outsider looking in, but yet they were kind of coordinating things because with that shapeshifter ability, they could jump to different people. And then the second piece they had in volume two, the music element is like Be Still My Heart, because music is very much a part of writing. And the fact that there was, the music and the different pop culture references going through the spaceship, I kind of went internal on that, and I combined the empath and the telepath so I could explore how that going on inside a person actually impacts other characters.
Yeah, I like that. So what writers have inspired you throughout your life? Obviously, as a writer, anytime I ask this, we all have countless answers, but just what are some of the influences on you, either stylistically, imaginatively?
Yeah, there's three main writers, I guess, that have kind of influenced my writing journey. One would be C.S. Lewis with the Chronicles of Narnia, that portal premise, and kind of how there's the layers of story, but there's also a layer of symbolism. Tolkien, because come on, the king of fantasy, words, language, characters. J.K. Rowling, I know she's a little bit contentious right now, but the immersion in that world and the reach of the Harry Potter world, I definitely, grew up during that time. And so those three, all technically fantasy, though you could argue different elements.
Right. Yeah, very all sort of similar but different. They're into the same genre, but obviously Tolkien and Lewis, even being contemporary, had both very different takes on and very different ideas about fantasy. All right. So other than reading, where do you draw your inspiration from? And I'm trying to make this so it isn't the question, where do you get your ideas, which is the worst question to ask any creative person, because the answer is always, I don't know, they just come to me. But what are some things that, like, if you are, I guess, looking for inspiration or routinely spark ideas from you, what sort of places in your life, either activities or places or things, just routinely inspire you?
It is random. Random ideas, words, maybe a certain phrase just kind of like lights a spark. There might be some odd observation, something that just kind of catches my attention. A lot of times I do kind of think that what if, and write out scenarios that could be.
All right, so it's gonna start wrapping up. So we got a lightning round, just some short, sort of more fluffy questions. It's a lightning round, so the idea is you're supposed to answer quickly without bloviating or thinking about it too much, and none of them have straightforward answers, so too bad. What's your favorite band?
My favorite band, it's not a band,
Okay.
it's individual. So right now I'm thinking Taylor Swift or BB Rexa.
I've been listening to almost nothing but Taylor Swift for the last few months, so I can respect that. Favorite book to read out loud?
Don't Bump the Glump or some other like poetry thing
Yes.
that's going to be like trippy word.
It's fun to say out loud. Yes. Okay, good. Favorite takeout dish?
Favorite takeout dish? The 2 patties with the onion sauce, tavern burger, lettuce wrapped from Red Robin.
Okay. Marvel or DC?
I'm not really a comic person.
That is okay. It doesn't make you a bad nerd. Not the first person to say that. Waffles or pancakes?
Waffles, simply because Shrek and that donkey moment.
Good reason. Whiskey, beer, or wine?
Wine.
Awesome. Do aliens exist?
Definitely different life forms. I don't know that they are aliens as we, propagate them and present them.
Awesome. Will humanity be around in 100 years?
I hope so.
That's probably as confident as any of us can get these days. All right. So I also like to ask at the end for what's making you happy this week or an endorsement. My favorite thing on podcasts is when people, suggest a movie, TV show, music, something they've done recently that just made them happy that they can recommend that other people check out. So what's making you happy this week?
Catan is making me happy this week. It's sitting right on the other side of my computer on the table.
Okay. So before we wrap up, where can people find you online if they'd like to follow you or your writing?
I tweet my randomosity at I Spark It, and I recently started a Facebook page, Sparks Writes, and then I think I sent a few other links, a poetry blog that, since you mentioned, a lot of my poetry stuff's on there, and I'm working on a website, Sparks Blogabits, but it's under construction.
All right. Yep. And all those links will be in the show notes below. All right. So I think we're going to wrap up there. So again, for links to Sarah's social media accounts and websites and all that good stuff, you can see the notes below. You can find Sarah's poems and experimental fiction in both Achten Tan, Land of Dust and Bone and Under New Suns, which are on sale now, as well as a few other books, which we'll link to below. You can buy Achten Tan and Under New Suns and Skullgate's other books directly from us at skullgatemedia.com, as well as Smashwords, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or you can support your local bookstore and ask them to order our books for you. You can read about our publishing collective and future projects here at skullgatemedia.com as well. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and our podcast of the same name, Sounds from the Year Between, and wherever you find your audio addiction. Don't miss our updates and content. Please sign up for our newsletter or follow us on Twitter at Skullgate Media. And I'll see you again in 2 weeks. So, Sarah, thanks for talking to me.
Thank you.